Michael, a dedicated medical student and waiter, endures humiliation from Elellanar Harrington, a wealthy patron who throws wine at him over a minor mistake. Struggling to support his leukemia-stricken sister, Emma, Michael faces pressure to apologize to protect his job in future. As whispers of the incident spread, a viral video exposes Elellanar's cruelty, while Dr. Wilson, a renowned oncologist, reveals Michael's selflessness as a bone marrow donor. Tensions rise as Michael debates quitting, leaving readers wondering, will he sacrifice his dignity or spark a movement for respect that could change everything? Subscribe to uncover tales of overlooked heroes like Michael, where justice prevails and hearts transform. Your support amplifies stories that inspire change. Be part of a community that honors dignity. Subscribe now and help make things right. In the opulent glow of Beastro Royal, a woman draped in diamonds sneered, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. People like you should be groveling for the chance to serve me. With a deliberate flick of her wrist, she tipped her wine glass, letting her crimson liquid spill across the table. The waiter stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as the wine dripped onto a folded hospital bill, peeking from his pocket, its edges worn from constant handling. Across the dimly lit dining room, a man with silver hair observed the scene, his jaw tightening. Quietly, he rose from his seat, his movement steady but charged with purpose, as if he'd seen enough. Michael, at 23, was a final-year medical student whose life was a relentless balancing act. By day, he navigated through the high-pressure world of the hospital rotations, his mind sharp and his hands steady as he worked under the watchful eyes of seasoned doctors. By night, he traded his white coat for a waiter uniform at Beastro Royal, an upscale restaurant where the city's elite dined. The job wasn't a choice but a necessity, a means to keep his world from crumbling. Each night, after the hours of memorizing medical texts and assisting in surgeries, he moved through the restaurant with grace and quiet precision, his exhaustion masked by a practiced smile. Another late shift, his supervisor asked that evening, watching as Michael adjusted his tie with care, the fabric slightly frayed at the edges. Michael nodded, his voice steady but tired. Until midnight. I need the hours. What his colleagues didn't know, what he kept buried beneath his calm exterior, was that 70% of his earnings went to his 8-year-old sister, Emma. She was fighting a rare form of leukemia, a battle that had begun 2 years ago, shortly after a car accident claimed their parents. The loss had shattered their small family, leaving Michael as Emma's sole guardian, her protector, her everything. Between hospital rounds and restaurant shifts, he worked 18-hour days. He survived fueled by black coffee and an unyielding resolve to keep Emma alive. His professor had called him the most promising young doctor I've seen in decades, a rare compliment that Michael held close, like a talisman against despair. Tucked in his pocket, alongside Emma's hospital bill, was a photo of her, her gap-toothed smile beaming despite the colorful scarf wrapped around her bald head. Her image, that was his anchor, a reminder of why he endured the sleepless nights and aching feet, why he pushed through when his body begged for rest. It was a Thursday evening when Elellanar Harrington swept into Beastro Royal, her presence commanding the room like a storm rolling in. The wife of a real estate tycoon, James Harrington, she had chosen the restaurant to celebrate her 45th birthday, her diamond jewelry glinting under the chandeliers. She snapped her fingers at Michael, her tone dripping with disdain. You, waiter, this table is utterly unacceptable. Move us immediately. The manager scurried over, his voice syrupy syrup with deference. Mrs. Harrington, it's an honor to have you again. We'll arrange something better immediately. Michael noticed the other servers averting their eyes, their reluctance palpable. She's gotten 3 people fired, Alicia, a fellow server, whispered as she passed him, her voice low and tense. We literally draw straws when she reserves. By some cruel twist of fate, Michael ended up assigned to her table. For 2 hours, nothing satisfied her. The water was too cold, the bread too warm, the lighting too dim, then too bright. Each complaint was laced with a pointed jab about her. Standards or competence, her words designed to sting. Michael absorbed it all, his face a mask of calm professionalism, though each jab tightened the knot of frustration in his chest. The breaking point came when a single drop of sauce slipped from the plate he was serving, landing on her Mrs. Designer handbag. His designer bag, her reaction was immediate and theatrical. "Look what you've done!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the restaurant, drawing every pair of eyes. "This bag is worth more than you'll ever earn." Michael's heart sank as he stammered an apology, his hands trembling, slightly trembling as he reached for a napkin. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. Let me—" "Sorry?" She cut him off, her eyes blazing with contempt. In a calculated move, she seized her wine glass and flung its contents at him, the red wine at her, splashing wine across his face and soaking his white shirt. "My bag costs more than you'll earn in a year. Clearly, your mother never taught you how to serve properly." The restaurant fell silent, into the clatter of cutlery replaced by the soft drip of dripping wine onto the floor. Several guests murmured, pulled out their phones, recording the scene with detached curiosity, but no one stepped forward. Michael stood rooted into the spot, the wine stinging his eyes, his shirt clinging to his chest skin. Beneath the public humiliation, his thoughts raced to Emma, to the hospital bill due tomorrow, its numbers seared into his memory. He forced his voice to stay calm, though it trembled at the edges. "My mother passed away 2 years ago, ma'am," he said softly, quietly, Mrs. Words barely carrying over the hush of the room. Harrington blinked, momentarily thrown, but her expression hardened again, unrepentant. The manager rushed over, his apologies directed solely at Mrs. Harrington, as if Michael were a piece of scenery. "This is totally unacceptable, Mrs. Harrington," he said, his voice tone dripping obsequious, with flattery. "Your entire meal is on the house, and please allow us to offer you our finest champagne." Michael stood there, frozen still dripping, his presence ignored, his dignity stripped away in front of a room full of strangers. The weight of it pressed against his chest, a mix of anger and helplessness he couldn't afford to let show. In the break room later, Michael dabbed at his stained shirt with club soda, his hands still shaking from the ordeal encounter. The fabric was ruined, a small but a stinging reminder of the night's ordeal. His manager leaned against the doorway doorframe, his voice pragmatic and cold. "Just say you're sorry, apologize, Michael. We can't afford to lose customers like the Harringtons." Michael's eyes flashed with defiance, though his voice stayed quiet. "She threw wine at me." The cameras caught it all. The manager sighed, his expression weary but firm, resolute. "The customer is always right. That's the policy." The manager sighed. "We can't lose customers like the Harringtons." "Look, I know it's unfair, but think about your situation. You've got medical school debt, right? Your sister's treatments. Can you afford to stand on principles right now?" The words hit Michael like a punch, each one a reminder of his burden's reality. His $200,000 in student loans loomed over him, a ever-present shadow. Emma's treatment cost $4,000 a monthly, a price he paid without hesitation, though it left him with barely enough to survive. Principles were a luxury he couldn't afford, yet the injustice of it all burned at him, gnawed, a wound deeper than he could see that refused to heal close. Michael sat at his desk, staring at the 3 crumpled reports of customer harassment stuffed into the drawer. Each one was a testament to indignities he'd endured, incidents he'd meticulously documented, hoping for some semblance of justice. But as his manager's words echoed in his mind, their futility sank in. They'll stay there. That's reality. Yeah, the weight of those words pressed against his chest, a mix of resignation and quiet rage. He wasn't just a server at Beastro Royal. He was a medical student, a brother, a person with dreams far bigger than the polished dining room he navigated nightly. Yet here he was, trapped in a cycle where his worth seemed tied to how much abuse he could silently absorb. When Michael stepped back onto the restaurant floor, the air shifted. Conversations among his colleagues dwindled to hushed murmurs, their eyes darting toward him before skittering away. "He must have provoked her somehow," a coworker whispered, the words slicing through the hum of clinking glasses and forced laughter. Michael's jaw tightened. Provoked? He'd done nothing but his father. Just a job, serving Mrs. Elellanar Harrington with the same professionalism he offered every guest. Yet the narrative had already twisted against him. The service industry, he'd learned, was a battlefield where the customer's word was gospel, and workers like him were expected to swallow their pride alongside the insults. Across the dining room, Mrs. Harrington sat bathed in the glow of her own self-importance, sipping complimentary champagne as if it were her birthright. Her voice carried over the tables, brash and unapologetic, as she spun a tale of an incompetent server who deliberately sabotaged her evening. In her version, Michael hadn't just spilled a drop of wine. He'd practically assaulted her prized designer handbag, a $5,000 status symbol she clutched like a shield. Her friends nodded along, their laughter sharp and performative, amplifying her indignation. To them, Michael wasn't a person. He was a prop in her story, a faceless obstacle to her perfect night. The unfairness of it churned in Michael's gut, but he kept his expression neutral, a skill honed through months of biting his tongue. By morning, the incident had metastasized online. Clips of Mrs. Harrington's tirade, carefully edited to paint her as the victim, circulated on social media, racking up views and comments. Local news picked up the story, focusing not on her behavior, but on her status as a philanthropist, as if her charitable donations somehow absolved her of accountability. Disturbance at Beastro Royal involving Elellanar Harrington. The headlines read, her name glowing with prestige while Michael's was nowhere to be found. The erasure stung more than he expected. He wasn't just invisible, he was expendable. An email from the restaurant's owner arrived before his next shift, its tone cold and transactional. A formal written apology to Mrs. Harrington is necessary to maintain harmony and protect our reputation. Michael read it twice, his stomach twisting. Harmony? Reputation? The words felt like a slap, as if his dignity was a small price to pay for the restaurant's image. When he showed the email to his roommate, the response was predictably blunt. You chose this profession, man. It comes with the territory. Michael's hands clenched into fists. Serving food comes with the territory, he shot back, his voice low but firm. Being dehumanized doesn't. His roommate shrugged, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Michael. A mix of exhaustion, defiance, and a desperate need to hold on to the person he was before this job started chipping away at him. That evening, Michael returned to work, each step into Beastro Royal heavier than the last. The stares from colleagues and customers burned into him, their judgment palpable. He felt like a specimen under glass, every move scrutinized, every mistake magnified. During his break, he retreated to a quiet corner and pulled out Emma's latest test results, the numbers glaring up at him like a cruel riddle. Next to them was a photo of his little sister, her brave smile a beacon in the chaos of his life. She was fighting her own battle, one far fiercer than any dining room drama. And Michael's determination to be there for her, to be someone she could look up to, kept him grounded. As he traced the edges of the photo, it slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the floor. An older gentleman with silver hair stooped to pick it up, his movements deliberate but kind. Yours, I presume? He asked, handing it back with a gentle smile. Michael's cheeks flushed as he tucked the photo away. My sister, he said quickly, hoping to deflect further questions. The man's gaze lingered, not with pity, but with a curious intensity. You look familiar, young man, he said, his voice warm but probing. Michael shrugged, trying to keep things light. I've been working here about 18 months, sir. The man shook his head. No, not from here. He extended a hand. Dr. James Wilson. I've recently returned to practice at Memorial after 30 years at Johns Hopkins. Michael's breath caught. Dr. James Wilson? The pediatric oncologist whose groundbreaking paper on rare lymphomas had been the cornerstone of Michael's presentation last semester. Your work on childhood leukemia, it was revolutionary, Michael said, his voice tinged with awe. I presented on it at school. Dr. Wilson's eyes lit up, recognition snapping into place. That's it. You're the student doctor. Garrison mentioned a brilliant presentation on unusual manifestations in pediatric cases. For a moment, Michael felt seen, not as a server, not as that sort of punching bag, but as the aspiring doctor he was working so hard to become. The validation was fleeting but powerful, a reminder of the future he was fighting for. Their conversation was cut short by a commotion at the entrance. Mrs. Harrington had returned, her entourage in tow, her presence like a storm cloud sweeping through the restaurant. Michael's stomach dropped, his brief moment of reprieve shattered. Her voice rang out, sharp and deliberate, as she spotted him. "I can't believe they still employ that incompetent boy," she declared, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. "One call to the hospital board, and he'll never practice medicine in this state." The threat landed like a physical blow, her words laced with the kind of power that could unravel everything Michael had worked for. His pulse raced, not out of fear, but from the sheer audacity of her entitlement. She didn't just want an apology, she wanted to erase him. Dr. Wilson's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face as he connected her name to a patient from years ago. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing, his silence heavy with unspoken judgment. Michael turned away, heading for the kitchen, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and resolve. The manager cornered him before he could catch his breath. "Mrs. Harrington's requesting a different server," he said, his tone apologetic but firm. "And she's asking that you be terminated." Michael's laugh was bitter. "For what? Existing?" The manager's face contorted with discomfort. "Michael, her husband's on the hospital board. Think about your career." The words hung between them, a stark reminder of the power imbalance that defined Michael's world. But as he stood there, the weight of Emma's photo in his pocket, something inside him snapped. "I'm thinking about my dignity," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "And my sister, who needs me to be someone she can look up to." He untied his apron, the gesture deliberate, a quiet declaration of his worth. "What I need is to work somewhere that doesn't value a $5,000 handbag over basic human decency." The manager's face fell, torn between sympathy and the pressure of his own position. "Don't be dramatic, Michael. You need this job." But Michael was already moving, his decision made. The restaurant buzzed with tense energy as he emerged from the kitchen, his apron folded under his arm. This would be his last shift, no matter what came next. Mrs. Harrington held court at her table, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Do you know who my husband is?" she crowed, her words dripping with smug certainty. "That boy will never finish medical school once James hears about this." The mention of Dr. Wilson's name sent a chill through Michael, but he didn't falter. The manager approached, his voice low and pleading. "She wants you to apologize publicly for your attitude. Please, Michael, think about your future." Mrs. Harrington's eyes locked onto them, her lips curling into a triumphant smirk. "You come here," she commanded, pointing at Michael. He walked towards her table, his posture straight, his humiliation a dull ache he refused to let define him. She turned to Dr. Wilson, who had followed quietly behind. "Are you the manager?" she demanded, her tone imperious. Dr. Wilson's response was calm, measured, and laced with a quiet authority that made the air around them still. "No, Mrs. Harrington, I'm not the manager." At the sound of her name spoken by an unfamiliar voice, Elellanar Harrington's head jerked upward, her eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and unease. "Hello, Eleanor," the voice continued, calm yet carrying the weight of familiarity. It was Dr. Wilson, a man whose face tugged at the edges of her memory, stirring a faint recognition that took several heartbeats to solidify. Dr. Wilson, Tyler's doctor. The man who had guided her son through the darkest days of his illness 15 years ago. Her heart clenched at the thought of those harrowing months, the sterile hospital rooms, the endless waiting, the fear that had gnawed at her soul. She nodded faintly, her polished exterior faltering as she processed his presence. "It's been a long time," Dr. Wilson said, his voice warm, but tinged with something deeper, something that made Eleanor's stomach twist with uncertainty. "Your son, Tyler, has grown into an exceptional young man, pre-med at Stanford, if I'm not mistaken." Eleanor's lips curved into a hesitant smile, pride for her son battling the disquiet that Dr. Wilson's unexpected appearance stirred within her. She glanced at Michael, the young waiter standing nearby, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed on the floor as if he could will himself invisible. "You two know each other?" she asked, her manicured hand gesturing between Michael and the doctor, her voice betraying a flicker of suspicion. Dr. Wilson's hand settled on Michael's shoulder, a gesture both paternal and grounding. This young man, he said, his tone steady but carrying an undercurrent of revelation, is the brilliant student I spoke of at the Children's Hospital fundraiser last month. The one dedicating his life to researching rare leukemia variants. Eleanor's champagne glass hovered midair, her fingers tightening around the delicate stem as her breath caught. The restaurant, once buzzing with clinking glasses and murmured conversations, seemed to fall into a hush, every pair of eyes turning toward their table. Dr. Wilson's voice softened, but it carried a weight that pressed against Eleanor's chest. What you don't know, Eleanor, is that Michael's sister, Emma, is battling the same rare leukemia that Tyler once faced. The words landed like a blow, and Eleanor's mind reeled, her thoughts spiraling back to the sleepless nights when Tyler's life hung in the balance, the agony of watching her child suffer. She could scarcely imagine another family enduring that same torment, let alone the young man she had dismissed so callously, the one she had tried to have fired for some minor slight she could barely recall. But Wilson's gaze held hers, unyielding yet compassionate. Furthermore, he continued, Michael has donated bone marrow 3 times to anonymous recipients through the National Registry. Your son, Tyler, was the 2nd recipient. The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet, her face drained of color, the warmth of the champagne glass in her hand turning cold against her skin. She set it down with trembling fingers, the clink against the table sounding unnaturally loud in the silent room. Michael, standing beside Dr. Wilson, looked as stunned as she felt, his dark eyes wide with disbelief. I never knew who received my donations, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he was clearly struggling to contain. It's medical privacy, Dr. Wilson explained, his tone gentle but resolute. But during Tyler's last checkup, I recognized your name in the database, Eleanor. I couldn't stay silent. Eleanor's mind raced, guilt and shame clawing at her insides. She had judged Michael so harshly, seen him as nothing more than a server, a faceless figure unworthy of her time or respect. And yet, this young man, this worthless young man, as she had called him in her complaints to the manager, had given a part of himself to save her son. His cells were coursing through Tyler's veins, granting him the chance to chase his dreams, to live. Her throat tightened, and she fought to maintain the composure that had always been her armor. The manager, who had been hovering nearby, suddenly stepped forward, his voice dripping with a concern that felt painfully insincere. Michael, are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Michael's lips twitched, suppressing a bitter laugh at the manager's abrupt shift from indifference to solicitude. The hypocrisy stung, but he said nothing, his jaw tight with restraint. Eleanor rose from her seat, her carefully curated poise cracking like thin ice. Her thoughts churned with memories of Tyler's recovery, how he had spoken so reverently of the anonymous donor who had given him a second chance at life. He was studying medicine now, driven by a desire to emulate that selfless act, to become a healer in his own right. And all this time, the person responsible had been standing before her, serving her drinks, enduring her sharp words and dismissive glances. Tears welled in her eyes, smudging the flawless makeup she had always worn like a mask. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking as she turned to Michael. My behavior was inexcusable. In a desperate gesture, she began to unclasp her diamond bracelet, the jewels glinting under the restaurant's soft lighting. Please, accept this. No, Michael interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, his hand reaching out to stop her. Money doesn't fix everything, Mrs. Harrington. His words were not accusatory, but they cut through her defenses all the same. She froze, the bracelet dangling from her fingers, her heart pounding with the weight of her own failures. Then what can I do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, raw with vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Michael's gaze softened, but his words carried a quiet strength. Respect isn't something you buy. It's something you give freely to everyone, no matter their position or their income. Dr. Wilson watched the exchange, his expression a mixture of sorrow and hope. We never truly know the battles others are fighting, he said, his voice a quiet anchor in the charged moment, or the value they bring to the world, especially when we don't bother to look beyond appearances. His words hung in the air, a challenge to everyone in the room, a reminder of the humanity that connected them all. 6 months later, the restaurant had transformed. A framed code of mutual respect now adorned its walls, its words a testament to a new ethos that applied equally to staff and patrons. Elellanar Harrington, once defined by her wealth and status, had found a new purpose. She had established a scholarship to cover Emma's treatments and support Michael's medical education, a gesture born not of guilt, but of a profound desire to make amends. The moment in the restaurant had been captured on video, and its viral spread had ignited a movement, a call for respect for service workers that rippled across the city and then the nation. Workplace policies began to shift, prioritizing dignity over outdated notions of customer supremacy. Dr. Wilson, inspired by Michael's dedication, had invited him to join his research team, where they worked tirelessly on innovative treatments for childhood leukemia. The possibility that their work could one day save thousands of children like Emma filled Michael with a quiet pride, though he carried the weight of his sister's ongoing battle in his heart. Eleanor, meanwhile, had stepped into an unexpected role as an advocate against workplace bullying. The woman who once snapped her fingers at servers now stood before audiences at conferences, her voice steady as she spoke of the need for respect across social divides. A person's value isn't measured by their wealth, she told a television interviewer, her words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. It's measured by how they treat others. Across the country, restaurants adopted zero-tolerance policies against harassment, replacing the tired mantra of the customer is always right with a commitment to mutual dignity. News outlets moved beyond sensational clips, delving into deeper discussions about class divides and labor rights. A major magazine ran a feature on Michael and Eleanor's story, its headline proclaiming, "Sometimes the most important people are the ones we overlook." On a bright spring morning, Michael stood in Emma's hospital room, clutching her discharge papers. After 2 years of grueling treatments, her cancer was in remission. The room was filled with a quiet joy, the kind that comes after a long, hard-fought battle. Emma's smile was weak but radiant, her eyes bright with the promise of a future she hadn't dared to hope for. Michael's heart swelled with relief, but also with a quiet resolve. The fight wasn't over, not for Emma, not for the countless others like her. But for now, they had won this moment, and it was enough. Emma's small hands fumbled with the worn straps of her backpack, carefully tucking her few possessions inside: a tattered sketchbook, a faded stuffed bunny, and a handful of colored pencils that had seen better days. Her eyes, wide with a mix of hope and uncertainty, lifted to Michael. "Real school now?" she asked, her voice soft but brimming with a longing she barely dared to express. The idea of a real school, with its sprawling playground, noisy hallways, and the promise of friends who didn't know her as the sick girl, felt like a dream she wasn't sure she could trust. Michael, kneeling to meet her gaze, felt his chest tighten. He saw the fragility in her question, the weight of years spent in hospital rooms instead of classrooms. "Real school, real playground, real everything," he promised, his voice steady but laced with the fierce determination that had carried him through the darkest days. In that moment, he wasn't just promising her a school, he was vowing to give her the childhood she'd been denied. Weeks later, Michael stood at the podium of his medical school graduation, his crisp white coat a symbol of years of sacrifice and sleepless nights. The auditorium buzzed with the pride of families and the nervous excitement of his classmates. But Michael's mind wandered to the journey that had brought him here. His speech began quietly, his words deliberate. "Sometimes our darkest moments carve the path to our greatest transformations," he said, his voice growing stronger as he scanned the crowd. He spoke of loss, of resilience, of the small, stubborn sparks of hope that had kept him going when despair threatened to swallow him whole. In the audience, Elellanar Harrington sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Once she might have dismissed such words as sentimental nonsense, but now they pierced her, stirring a warmth she hadn't known she could feel. As Michael's speech ended, she rose to her feet, her applause the first to break the silence. The sound wasn't just for him, it was for the woman she was becoming, one who had learned compassion through the humbling sting of her own mistakes. Eleanor's transformation hadn't come easily. Months ago, she had walked through life armored in wealth and privilege, believing they shielded her from vulnerability. But her son's battle with cancer and the quiet courage of Emma, a girl who faced the same illness with a smile, had shattered that illusion. Eleanor had been forced to confront her own arrogance, her tendency to see people like Emma, or even Michael, a young doctor from a modest background, as beneath her notice. Now she volunteered every week at the oncology ward where her son had once lain, reading stories to children whose laughter filled the sterile rooms with life. She read with a tenderness she hadn't known she possessed, her voice steady even when her heart ached for the kids who reminded her of her son, or of Emma, whose resilience had taught her that true strength wasn't measured in bank accounts or social status. After Michael's graduation, she approached him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "I used to think wealth was power," she said, her voice low but earnest. "But I was wrong. Real power lies in how many lives you touch, how many hearts you lift when they're breaking." Michael nodded, sensing the weight of her words. He saw not the cold, untouchable woman she'd once been, but someone who had chosen to rebuild herself, brick by painful brick. Dr. Wilson, the hospital's chief oncologist, had been watching Emma's story unfold from the sidelines, his own heart stirred by her courage. He'd seen too many children lose their battles, and Emma's survival felt like a rare gift. To honor her, he established a research fellowship in her name, a fund to support aspiring oncologists from underprivileged backgrounds. The fellowship wasn't just a financial lifeline, it was a promise that Emma's legacy would live on, inspiring doctors who might one day save other children like her. When he told Emma about it, her eyes lit up, though she didn't fully grasp its scope. To her, it was just another sign that the world could be kind, that people could care. For Dr. Wilson, it was a way to keep fighting, to ensure that the pain he witnessed daily in his ward fueled something hopeful. As Michael and Eleanor left the auditorium, the reception outside was a flurry of laughter, clinking glasses, and proud embraces. Michael's eyes caught on a young waiter weaving through the crowd, his arms straining under the weight of a tray laden with drinks. The server's face was tight with concentration, his steps careful to avoid spilling a single glass. Without a second thought, Eleanor moved toward him, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She reached the glass door just as he did and held it open, her smile warm and unforced. The waiter, startled by the gesture, looked up. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. Eleanor shook her head gently. "No," she replied, her tone rich with sincerity. "Thank you for your service." When she paused, her gaze steady. "The smallest gestures often reveal the greatest transformations. A civilized society is measured by how we treat those who serve us, those who go unseen." The waiter nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, and moved on. Michael, watching the exchange, felt a quiet pride. Eleanor's words weren't just polite. They were a testament to the woman she'd become, one who saw value in every person, no matter their role. For Emma, the promise of real school was a beacon, a chance to step into a world where she could be a kid, not a patient. For Michael, it was a vow to keep fighting, to honor the lives he'd touched and those he'd lost. For Eleanor, it was a journey from pride to humility, a realization that true power came from lifting others up. And for the waiter, it was a fleeting moment of being seen, of mattering. Their stories wove together, proof that even the smallest acts, a promise, a clap, a held door, could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict.